Our little silly game saved my little daughter's life. When my daughter Olivia was 7, she got obsessed with this idea that we needed a secret way to communicate in emergencies. She'd just learned about World War II codebreakers in school and decided every family needed their own private language. I thought it was cute, so I played along. We spent a whole weekend creating what she called the rainbow system because she wanted it to sound cheerful and innocent. The phrases were weirdly specific for a 7-year-old. Red balloons meant danger or I'm not safe. Visiting Grandma Rose meant call the police, even though Grandma Rose died before Olivia was born. Music lessons meant someone is hurting me. Making cookies meant I'm scared but can't talk freely. The cabin meant I'm being taken somewhere against my will. We'd gone camping at a cabin once when she was 5. We practiced it like a game for months, slipping coded phrases into normal conversations at dinner or during car rides. If I said I was thinking about red balloons, Olivia would immediately respond with the safety phrase, "Dad's making pancakes." That meant everything was actually fine. If she didn't respond with that phrase, I was supposed to take her seriously. By the time Olivia turned 10, we'd mostly forgotten about the rainbow system. Life got busy with her soccer schedule and my work deadlines. The code became something we joked about occasionally. Remember when you made me memorize all those weird phrases? But I noticed she still used some of them without thinking, the way you might still knock on wood or avoid stepping on cracks. She'd mention red balloons when she was anxious about a test, say she needed music lessons when she was overwhelmed. It had become part of her emotional vocabulary, without either of us really noticing. When Olivia turned 14, she started dating a guy named Brandon from her freshman class. He seemed fine at first, polite when he came to pick her up, decent grades, played junior varsity basketball. My ex-wife Rachel liked him because he was on student council. I had a weird feeling about him that I couldn't explain. Something about how he'd steer Olivia away from her friends when they hung out in groups. But I chalked it up to being an overprotective dad. 3 months into their relationship, Olivia's texts started changing. She'd always been a frequent texter, sending me memes and random thoughts throughout the day. But suddenly, her messages got shorter and less frequent. When I'd ask how school was, she'd respond with one-word answers. When I'd suggest we grab dinner, she'd say she had plans with Brandon. I mentioned it to Rachel, but she said I was being paranoid, that teenagers naturally pull away from their parents, that Olivia was just growing up and I needed to give her space. The texts that did come through seemed fine on the surface, but something felt off. They sounded like Olivia, but also not quite right. Too formal, too careful, missing the random tangents and emoji spam that usually characterized her messages. Then, on a Wednesday night, I got a text that made me stop cold. Had a great day today. Brandon took me to look at red balloons for the Valentine's dance. We might do music lessons together since we both need to learn. The dance committee is thinking about having it at the cabin venue, thinking of making cookies for the bake sale. My hand started shaking. Every single sentence contained a code phrase: red balloons, music lessons, cabin, making cookies. But there was no safety phrase, no "dad's making pancakes" to indicate she was joking. I stared at my phone trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that she was just randomly using phrases that happened to match our old code. But Olivia never mentioned the Valentine's dance before. She wasn't on the dance committee, and we didn't have a cabin venue in town. She deliberately packed every warning signal into one message, which meant this wasn't accidental. Someone was hurting her. Someone was making her scared, and she couldn't tell me directly. I immediately called her phone, went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times. Same result. I texted asking if she was okay. No response. I called Rachel, who said Olivia was sleeping over at her friend Jessica's house, and I was being ridiculous for panicking over nothing. I drove to Jessica's house anyway. Rang the doorbell at 9:30 at night. Jessica's mom answered looking confused. Said Olivia wasn't there. That she hadn't seen Olivia in weeks, actually. She asked if everything was okay. I mumbled something about mixed-up plans before running back to my car. I called Rachel again. She finally admitted that Olivia wasn't at Jessica's. She was actually staying at Brandon's house because his parents were out of town, and she was helping him study. The casual way she said it made my blood boil. Our 14-year-old daughter was at her boyfriend's house overnight with no adults present, and Rachel thought that was fine. I asked for Brandon's address. She refused to give it to me, said I was going to embarrass Olivia by showing up like a crazy person. We argued for 5 minutes before she finally sent me the address just to get me off the phone. I drove there going well over the speed limit, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if I was wrong, and Olivia really was just randomly using old phrases? What if I burst in there and humiliated her in front of her boyfriend? But what if I was right and something terrible was happening? When I pulled up to Brandon's house, all the lights were off except for one upstairs window. I sat in my car for a minute trying to decide what to do. Then I saw movement in the lit window, someone pacing back and forth, and I heard yelling. Male voice, loud and angry. I got out of the car and tried the front door. Unlocked. The house was trashed. Furniture knocked over in the living room. Broken glass on the kitchen floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time and followed the sound of Brandon's voice to a bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was closed but not locked. I could hear him screaming about Olivia texting people, how she wasn't allowed to talk to anyone without his permission. I heard Olivia crying, saying she was just texting her dad about school stuff. Brandon called her a liar, said he'd seen the message and knew she was trying to signal someone. That's when I realized he'd partially figured out the code. I opened the door. Brandon was standing over Olivia with a baseball bat in his hands. She was on the floor next to the bed, blood running from her nose, her left eye already swelling shut. When Brandon saw me, he swung the bat in my direction, told me to get out, that this was none of my business. I didn't think, just reacted, grabbed the bat mid-swing and ripped it out of his hands. Then I put him on the ground, hard. He went down and stayed down. Olivia was sobbing, trying to stand up, but her legs wouldn't work. I scooped her up and carried her out of that house while calling 911 with my other hand. The operator stayed on the line while I put Olivia in my car, told me police were 3 minutes away, asked if Brandon was still in the house. I said yes, and that he better stay there unless he wanted to deal with me again. Police arrived within minutes. Ambulance right behind them. They loaded Olivia onto a stretcher while officers went inside to arrest Brandon. At the hospital, doctors examined Olivia and cataloged her injuries. Broken nose, black eye, bruised ribs, bruises on her arms and legs in various stages of healing. Some fresh, some weeks old, handprint bruises on her throat from being choked, defensive wounds on her hands where she'd tried to protect herself. Each new injury made me feel sicker. The doctor examining her had this careful, practiced way of documenting everything, taking photos for evidence, asking Olivia gentle questions about when each injury occurred and how she got it. Olivia answered in this flat, emotionless voice, like she was reading from a script, like she'd disconnected from her own body to get through it. The doctor asked if there had been any sexual assault. Olivia shook her head no. Thank God for that, at least. They kept her overnight for observation and gave her resources for counseling and support groups. A victim advocate came by with pamphlets and phone numbers. Olivia took them without really looking at them. I stayed in the chair next to her bed all night, watching her sleep fitfully, jerking awake every time a nurse came in to check vitals. Rachel showed up around midnight, took one look at Olivia's battered face and started crying. We didn't talk much, just sat there together feeling like we'd failed our kid. The detective came by the next morning. Detective Lisa Chen, mid-40s, calm demeanor, but you could tell she'd seen some things. She explained that Brandon had been arrested at the scene, charged with aggravated assault, battery, false imprisonment, and assault with a deadly weapon for the bat. He was being held on $100,000 bail that his parents couldn't afford. Detective Chen said they'd done a deeper investigation into Brandon's phone and social media, found texts to his friends bragging about controlling his girlfriend, screenshots he'd taken of Olivia crying that he'd sent to his friends with captions about putting her in her place. There were group chats where he talked about training his girlfriend to obey him, messages where he described hitting her and how she'd apologized to him afterward, photos he'd taken of bruises he'd given her, like they were trophies. The detective showed me some of the evidence. I had to leave the room, went to the bathroom and threw up. My daughter had been dating a monster for 3 months, and I hadn't known. Chen also found evidence that Brandon had been researching ways to isolate partners and control their behavior. He'd been on forums where guys shared tactics for manipulating girlfriends. He'd saved articles about gaslighting and psychological abuse. This wasn't just a kid who'd lost his temper. This was calculated, systematic. He'd been studying how to break Olivia down. The district attorney was pursuing this aggressively. Chen said they wanted to make an example of Brandon, show other abusive teenagers that there would be serious consequences. She asked Olivia if she'd be willing to testify, explained what that would involve, the questions she'd have to answer, the fact that Brandon would be in the courtroom. Olivia looked terrified but nodded yes, said she wanted him to face consequences, wanted other girls to know they could come forward. I was proud of her for that, proud and heartbroken at the same time. Chen also told us they'd interviewed some of Olivia's former friends, the ones Brandon had pushed out of her life. Turns out several of them had noticed the abuse but didn't know how to help. One friend said she'd seen bruises and asked about them, but Olivia had insisted everything was fine. Another friend said Brandon had threatened her when she tried to talk to Olivia at school, told her to stay away from his girlfriend or she'd regret it. These kids had seen warning signs, but hadn't known what to do with that information, hadn't known how to report it or help Olivia escape. It made me think about how many people must have noticed something was wrong, but stayed quiet. Teachers, coaches, other parents. Abuse happens in plain sight more often than people think. We just look away because it's uncomfortable to confront. Over the next few days, the full story came out. Brandon had started getting possessive about a month into their relationship, checking Olivia's phone constantly, getting angry if she talked to other boys. He'd isolated her from her friends by starting fights whenever she made plans without him. Olivia told me later how it happened gradually. So slowly she didn't realize what was happening until she was already trapped. First, it was sweet. He wanted to spend all his time with her because he liked her so much. He got jealous when other guys looked at her because she was so beautiful. He wanted to know where she was all the time because he worried about her safety. Red flags dressed up as romance. Then came the rules. Don't talk to guys from your old friend group. Don't post photos on social media without showing me first. Text me every hour so I know you're okay. Olivia thought he just cared a lot. Thought his jealousy meant he was really into her. By month 2, he'd started checking her phone, going through her messages and demanding explanations for conversations with male classmates, accusing her of flirting when she was just being friendly. She started deleting messages to avoid his anger, started limiting who she talked to. Easier to comply than deal with his accusations. Then came the isolation from her female friends. Brandon said they were bad influences, said they were trying to break them up because they were jealous, said if Olivia really loved him, she'd choose him over them. So she did. Started declining invitations, stopped responding to group chats. Her social circle shrank until it was just her and Brandon. The physical abuse started small. A grab that was too tight, a shove during an argument. He'd apologize immediately, say he didn't mean it, say he'd been stressed and she'd just pushed his buttons. Olivia believed him, made excuses for him, thought if she just stopped making him angry, he'd go back to being the sweet guy from the beginning. But that guy never existed. The sweet boyfriend was just bait. The real Brandon was the one who hit her. The violence escalated over weeks. A slap became a punch. A punch became being thrown against a wall. Being thrown against a wall became being choked until she nearly passed out. And every time, Brandon would cry afterward. Say he was sorry. Say he loved her so much that he lost control. Say if she just listened better or didn't make him so crazy, he wouldn't have to hurt her. Classic abuser script. He threatened to kill himself if she ever left. Showed her a bottle of pills he claimed he'd take if she abandoned him. Made her responsible for keeping him alive. 14 years old, and she thought her boyfriend's life depended on her staying with him. He also threatened to hurt himself and blame her. Said if anyone found out about their fights, he'd tell them she started it, that she was the violent one, that he'd show people photos of scratches she'd given him while defending herself and claim she was abusive. He'd convinced her that nobody would believe her, that people would think she was lying for attention, that she'd be the one who got in trouble. And he'd isolated her so completely that she had nobody to turn to for help, no friends to confide in, no adults she trusted enough to tell. The only person she still had consistent contact with was me, and Brandon monitored those conversations carefully. That text message was the first time in weeks that Olivia had access to her phone without Brandon watching. He'd gone to the bathroom and left his phone on the bed. She'd grabbed hers from where he'd hidden it and sent that message as fast as she could. She'd tried to include every code phrase she could remember, hoping I'd see at least one of them, hoping I'd remember our system after all these years. If Brandon had come back 30 seconds earlier, he would have caught her, would have seen what she'd written, would have deleted it before I ever saw it. That's how close we came to missing our chance. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks later. Olivia had to testify about the abuse while Brandon sat 20 feet away glaring at her. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Watching Olivia take the stand, knowing she'd have to relive her trauma in front of the person who caused it. Brandon's parents were there. His mom cried through the whole thing. His dad sat stone-faced, refusing to look at anyone. The prosecutor walked Olivia through her testimony carefully, starting with how they met, how the relationship began, when things started to change. Olivia's voice shook, but she answered every question. Described the first time he hit her, the first time he choked her, how many times it happened after that. She talked about being isolated from her friends, about having her phone taken away, about being told she was worthless, and nobody would believe her if she told anyone. The prosecutor showed photos of her injuries. The jury saw her broken nose, her black eye, the handprint bruises on her throat. Brandon's lawyer tried to object. said the photos were prejudicial. The judge overruled him, said the jury had a right to see evidence of what happened. Then came cross-examination. Brandon's lawyer tried to make it seem like Olivia had exaggerated, asked if she'd ever hit Brandon back, if she'd ever started arguments, if she'd chosen to stay in the relationship. Classic victim-blaming tactics. Olivia handled it better than I expected. Stayed calm, answered honestly, admitted she'd hit him a few times while trying to defend herself, admitted she didn't leave when she probably should have. But she also explained why, explained the threats, the isolation, the fear. The prosecutor came back on redirect and asked one simple question. Were you afraid Brandon would kill you if you tried to leave? Olivia looked directly at Brandon for the first time during her testimony and said, yes, I thought he was going to kill me eventually, no matter what I did. You could hear people in the courtroom inhaling sharply. The judge found probable cause for all charges, ordered Brandon to stay away from Olivia, our house, her school, and any place she was likely to be. A restraining order was issued. He was fitted with an ankle monitor when his parents finally scraped together bail money by mortgaging their house. Brandon walked out of that courtroom free until trial. That bothered me, that he got to go home while Olivia still had nightmares. But the prosecutor assured us the ankle monitor would track him. If he came anywhere near Olivia, or violated the restraining order, he'd go straight back to jail. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later. The prosecutor said the evidence was strong enough that Brandon's lawyer would probably push for a plea deal. She was right. In the meantime, Olivia started therapy twice a week with a counselor who specialized in domestic violence survivors. Dr. Patricia Morgan, late 50s. Late. Kind eyes but no nonsense approach. She didn't sugarcoat anything or try to rush Olivia's healing. First session, Olivia barely talked, just sat on the couch picking at her fingernails while Dr. Morgan asked gentle questions. By the third session, Olivia started opening up, talking about the relationship, about the abuse, about how scared she still was. Dr. Morgan diagnosed her with PTSD, explained that Olivia's brain had been rewired by trauma, that the panic attacks and nightmares were normal responses to abnormal experiences. She put Olivia on medication to help with anxiety, taught her grounding techniques for when panic attacks hit, worked with her on processing the trauma bit by bit. The nightmares were brutal to watch. Olivia would wake up screaming, convinced Brandon was in her room. I'd have to turn on all the lights and check every closet and under the bed before she'd calm down enough to breathe normally. Some nights she couldn't go back to sleep. We'd sit in the kitchen drinking hot chocolate until sunrise. Not talking much, just being there together. She couldn't be in enclosed spaces without panicking. Elevators were impossible. Small rooms made her hyperventilate. Even sitting in the backseat of a car triggered anxiety because it reminded her of feeling trapped. Dr. Morgan said this was common for people who'd experienced the kind of imprisonment Olivia had, that her brain associated enclosed spaces with danger now. They worked on exposure therapy, gradually increasing the amount of time Olivia could spend in small spaces without freaking out. Started with a closet with the door open, worked up to a closet with the door closed for 30 seconds, then a minute, then 5 minutes. Progress was slow. Sometimes Olivia would have setbacks and lose ground they'd worked for weeks to gain. Dr. Morgan said this was normal. That healing wasn't linear. Olivia stopped eating. The anxiety killed her appetite. She'd force down a few bites at meals and then push her plate away, saying she felt sick. She lost 15 pounds in a month, started looking gaunt. Dark circles under her eyes from not sleeping. Rachel and I tried everything. Made her favorite foods. Ate meals together as a family. Didn't pressure her, but also didn't let her skip meals entirely. Dr. Morgan said the eating would improve as the anxiety decreased, that we needed to be patient and consistent. She was right. After a few months on medication and therapy, Olivia's appetite slowly came back. She started eating full meals again, gained back the weight she'd lost. The panic attacks decreased too, went from happening multiple times a day to once a day to a few times a week to maybe once a week. Still happening, still scary when they did, but less frequent. Olivia started doing homework again, going back to school, rejoining the world bit by bit. Her teachers were understanding, gave her extensions on assignments, let her leave class if she needed to, provided a quiet space where she could go when things got overwhelming. The school also implemented a safety plan. Brandon wasn't allowed on campus because of the restraining order, but they took extra precautions anyway. Security guards walked Olivia to her car. Teachers kept an eye on the parking lot. Some of Olivia's former friends reached out, apologized for not staying in touch, said they'd noticed something was wrong but didn't know how to help. Olivia forgave them, said she didn't blame them for not knowing what to do, that she'd pushed them away because Brandon made her. She rebuilt some of those friendships slowly. Coffee after school, study sessions at the library. Normal teenage stuff that had been impossible when Brandon was controlling her life. Watching her laugh with friends again made me realize how long it had been since I'd seen her genuinely happy. Months, maybe longer. Brandon had stolen her joy, but she was getting it back piece by piece. Rachel and I had several difficult conversations about how we'd miss the signs. We started our own therapy, not together at first, individual sessions to work through our guilt. My therapist helped me understand that abusers are experts at hiding their behavior, that Brandon had deliberately presented one face to parents and authority figures while showing Olivia his true self in private. But understanding that intellectually didn't make me feel less guilty. I kept replaying moments in my head, times when Olivia seemed off and I'd dismissed it, times when I'd noticed a bruise and accepted her soccer excuse too easily. There was one specific memory that haunted me. About 2 months into Olivia's relationship with Brandon, I'd picked her up from his house. She'd gotten in the car and been unusually quiet, had a bruise on her wrist that looked like finger marks. I'd asked about it. She'd said she fell during soccer practice. I'd known something felt wrong, but I'd let it go. Hadn't pushed, hadn't asked follow-up questions. If I'd pushed that day, maybe I could have ended things sooner. Maybe Olivia would have told me the truth. My therapist said thinking that way wasn't productive, that I couldn't have known. That second-guessing every past interaction would only make the guilt worse. But knowing she was right didn't stop the what-ifs from playing on loop in my head. Rachel was dealing with her own guilt. She'd been the one who encouraged the relationship, who thought Brandon was such a nice boy, who told me I was being paranoid when I expressed concerns. She'd wanted Olivia to have a normal teenage experience, wanted her to date and go to dances and do all the things teenagers do. So she'd actively dismissed warning signs, convinced herself everything was fine even when evidence suggested otherwise. During one of our family therapy sessions, Rachel broke down crying, apologized to Olivia for not protecting her, for not listening when I raised concerns, for being so focused on wanting normalcy that she'd ignored reality. Olivia hugged her and said she didn't blame either of us, that Brandon had fooled everyone, that this wasn't our fault, but it kind of was. Not the abuse itself. That was all Brandon, but our failure to see it sooner. Our failure to create an environment where Olivia felt safe coming to us for help. That was on us. The family therapist, Dr. James Martinez, helped us work through this, helped us separate what we could control from what we couldn't, helped us figure out how to support Olivia going forward. He taught us to watch for warning signs in relationships, to ask direct questions, to create space for honest conversations. He explained that most parents don't know what teen dating violence looks like, don't realize how common it is, don't understand that abuse can happen in relationships between 14-year-olds. We learned that 1 in 3 adolescents experiences dating violence, that it's not rare or unusual, that it happens across all demographics and socioeconomic levels. We learned the warning signs: possessiveness, jealousy, isolation from friends and family, controlling behavior, checking phones constantly, making all the decisions in the relationship. All things Brandon had done, all things we'd missed or dismissed. Dr. Martinez helped us develop better communication with Olivia, taught us to ask open-ended questions, to listen without judgment, to believe her when she expressed concerns. He also helped us rebuild trust, not just Olivia trusting us, but us learning to trust ourselves again as parents. We'd failed our kid, had to learn how to forgive ourselves for that while also doing better going forward. It was hard work, messy and uncomfortable, lots of crying during sessions, lots of difficult truths being spoken out loud, but it was necessary. We couldn't change what happened, could only learn from it and make sure we didn't repeat the same mistakes. 6 months after that night, Brandon's lawyer approached the prosecutor with a plea deal offer. Brandon would plead guilty to aggravated assault and battery in exchange for the other charges being dropped. They were asking for 2 years in juvenile detention followed by probation. The prosecutor brought the offer to us, said it was weak and she could do better. Olivia had to decide if she wanted to accept a plea or go to trial. Trial would mean more time for Brandon if they won, but it would also mean Olivia testifying again, being cross-examined more aggressively, having every detail of her relationship picked apart by defense attorneys. And trials are unpredictable. Juries can be sympathetic to defendants who cry and apologize. Brandon's lawyer would try to paint him as a troubled kid who made mistakes rather than a systematic abuser. Olivia talked it over with Dr. Morgan, with Rachel and me, with the prosecutor. She decided she wanted to counter-offer, would accept a plea if Brandon got at least 5 years in juvenile detention, plus 3 years supervised probation. The prosecutor took it back to Brandon's lawyer. After some negotiation, they settled on 5 years detention, 3 years probation, mandatory anger management and domestic violence prevention programs, and a permanent restraining order. Brandon would plead guilty to aggravated assault and battery. The other charges would be dismissed, but could be refiled if he violated the plea agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was guaranteed time, guaranteed consequences. No risk of a trial going sideways. Olivia accepted it. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. Brandon stood in front of the judge and admitted what he'd done. Pled guilty to hurting Olivia, to assaulting her with a deadly weapon. His voice was flat, no emotion, like he was reading a grocery list. Then came victim impact statements. Olivia read hers first. She'd worked on it with Dr. Morgan for weeks. She talked about what the abuse had done to her, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the fear that still controlled her life 2 years later. She talked about missing out on being a normal teenager, about losing friends, about learning to be afraid of someone who claimed to love her. She talked about how Brandon had made her doubt herself, made her think the abuse was her fault, made her believe nobody would ever believe her if she told. She looked directly at Brandon while she read. He wouldn't look at her, kept his eyes on the floor. When Olivia finished, the judge asked if I wanted to speak. I did. Told the judge about finding my daughter beaten and terrified, about the months of therapy, about watching her struggle to rebuild her life. Told the judge that Brandon hadn't just hurt Olivia. He'd hurt our whole family, made us question ourselves as parents, made us live with the guilt of not protecting her sooner. Told the judge that 5 years wasn't enough, but it was better than nothing. Then Brandon's lawyer stood up and tried his sympathy play. Talked about Brandon's difficult childhood, his parents' divorce when he was young, his struggles with anger management, how he was getting help now, how he was sorry for what he'd done. Brandon read a prepared statement apologizing to Olivia, said he never meant to hurt her, that he'd been dealing with his own trauma and took it out on her, that he hoped she could forgive him someday. It was garbage. Empty words that sounded like his lawyer had written them. The judge saw through it too. She looked at Brandon and asked him directly, "Do you understand what you did to this young woman?" Brandon nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you understand that domestic violence isn't about anger management? That it's about power and control?" Brandon hesitated, then nodded again. "I don't think you do," the judge said. "I think you're standing here saying what your lawyer told you to say because you want a lenient sentence. But nothing about your behavior suggests you understand the gravity of what you've done." She accepted the plea deal because it was what Olivia wanted, but she made it clear she thought Brandon was getting off easy. 5 years in juvenile detention, 3 years supervised probation upon release, mandatory completion of a year-long domestic violence prevention program, mandatory anger management, mandatory therapy, permanent restraining order keeping him away from Olivia for life. If he violated it even once, he'd go to adult prison. His record would be sealed when he turned 18 because he was a juvenile offender. But the restraining order would remain in effect permanently. The judge told Brandon she hoped he'd use his time in detention to become a better person, but that if she ever saw him in her courtroom again, she'd make sure he got the maximum sentence possible. Brandon was led away in handcuffs, his mother sobbing in the gallery, his father looking stoic and angry. They tried to approach us afterward to apologize, said they had no idea what Brandon was doing, that they'd raised him better than this, that they hoped we could all heal from this. I didn't want to hear it. Their apologies wouldn't undo what their son did to my daughter. Rachel and I walked out without acknowledging them. Olivia didn't even look in their direction. Outside the courthouse, Olivia broke down crying. Not sad crying, relief crying. It was over. Brandon had consequences. She was safe. We stood on the courthouse steps hugging while she sobbed into my shoulder. People walked past, giving us strange looks. I didn't care. My kid was safe. That's all that mattered. Olivia is 17 now. 2 years after that night. She's a senior in high school, applying to colleges. Top of her list is schools with strong psychology programs. She wants to specialize in trauma therapy someday. Wants to be for other survivors what Dr. Morgan has been for her. She still goes to therapy every week and probably will for years. Dr. Morgan says that's normal. That trauma recovery isn't something you complete and move on from. It's ongoing maintenance work, like taking medication for a chronic condition. Olivia's wary around guys her age and hasn't dated anyone since Brandon. She says she's not ready, that the idea of being in a relationship triggers anxiety she's not equipped to handle yet. Some of her friends have boyfriends and she's happy for them, but watching them hold hands or kiss makes her uncomfortable. Brings back memories she'd rather not relive. Dr. Morgan says she'll date again when she's ready, that there's no timeline for this, That rushing into a relationship before she's healed would just set her up for more trauma. She still has panic attacks. Not as frequent as they used to be, but they still happen. Last month we were at a restaurant, and a couple at the next table started arguing. Nothing physical, just raised voices and aggressive body language. Olivia immediately started hyperventilating. Her hands were shaking, couldn't catch her breath. She excused herself and went to the bathroom to do breathing exercises. Took her 20 minutes to calm down enough to come back to the table. She apologized for making a scene. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that her reactions are valid, and anyone who has a problem with it can deal with me. Certain triggers are unavoidable. Aggressive behavior in movies, certain colognes that remind her of Brandon, anyone yelling near her, even if they're not yelling at her. She's learned to manage these triggers better, has techniques for grounding herself when she starts to spiral. But they still affect her, still disrupt her life in ways that Brandon will never face consequences for. But she's healing. She rejoined her soccer team junior year, started as a bench player, worked her way back to being a starting midfielder. The physical activity helps with anxiety, according to Dr. Morgan. Plus, soccer was something Brandon had taken from her. Reclaiming it felt like taking back a piece of herself. She reconnected with friends she'd lost during the relationship. Jessica, her best friend from before Brandon, was hesitant at first, felt guilty for not seeing the abuse, for not staying in touch when Brandon pushed her away. Olivia told her it wasn't her fault, that Brandon was skilled at isolating his victims, that 14-year-old kids shouldn't be expected to recognize domestic violence patterns that adults miss. They're close again now. Jessica and another friend, Alyssa, are the two people Olivia taught the rainbow system to. They practice it regularly, text each other random code phrases to stay sharp, make it part of their normal communication, so using it in an emergency would feel natural. They've already used it twice. Once at a party junior year, a senior guy was hitting on Alyssa and wouldn't take no for an answer. Got aggressive when she tried to walk away. Cornered her in a hallway. Alyssa texted Jessica, "red balloons," and Jessica immediately came to get her. Made up an emergency that required Alyssa to leave right away. Got her out of that situation before it escalated. Another time, Jessica's ex started showing up places she'd be, following her from school to work, sitting in his car outside her house. Jessica texted Olivia, "Thinking about summer, which means I'm being followed." Olivia told me. I called Jessica's parents. They documented everything and got a restraining order. The ex backed off once he realized adults were paying attention. The code works. Gives people a way to ask for help without tipping off the person they need help getting away from. Olivia started a support group at school for teen relationship violence. Meets once a week in the counselor's office during lunch. First meeting, 3 girls showed up. Girls who'd experienced dating violence but hadn't told anyone, who thought they were alone, who didn't realize what was happening to them even qualified as abuse. Olivia shared her story. Not the gory details, just the overview. How Brandon isolated her. How the violence escalated. How she used a code to ask for help when asking directly wasn't safe. She told them about the rainbow system. Explained how her dad and she had created it when she was 7. How it saved her life at 14. One of the girls, a sophomore named Zoe, went home and created a similar code with her mom that same night. 2 weeks later, Zoe used it. Her boyfriend had driven her to his house after school. Said they were going to study. Once they got there, he locked the doors and refused to let her leave. Started yelling at her for texting another guy in her biology class. Zoe was terrified, but she'd practiced her family code. So while her boyfriend was ranting, she texted her mom "purple rain," which was their danger phrase. Her mom called the police and showed up with 2 squad cars. Got Zoe out safely. Her boyfriend was arrested for false imprisonment. Zoe's mom called me to say thank you. Said if Olivia hadn't shared her story, her daughter might still be trapped in that relationship. Might have ended up like Olivia, or worse. Hearing that made me realize something good had come from our nightmare. That Olivia's pain was helping other kids escape their own nightmares. The support group has grown. Now has about 15 regular members. Mix of kids who've experienced dating violence and kids who have friends in abusive relationships and want to know how to help. Olivia runs it like a pro. Creates a safe space where kids can talk openly, where they can share their experiences without judgment, where they learn that abuse isn't their fault and that leaving is possible. She brings in guest speakers. Detective Chen came and talked about documenting abuse and getting restraining orders. Dr. Morgan did a session on recognizing trauma symptoms and finding help. A family lawyer explained legal options for teen victims, how emancipation works, what resources exist for kids who need to escape abusive homes or relationships. Olivia's turned her trauma into advocacy. Dr. Morgan says that's a healthy way to reclaim power, to take something terrible that happened to you and use it to prevent it from happening to others. She also volunteers at the youth center every Saturday morning, runs workshops for younger kids about personal safety, including creating family communication codes. She teaches kids as young as 6 how to make their own safety systems, age-appropriate versions, simple phrases they can remember. The kids love it because it feels like a game. Secret spy codes, fun family projects. They don't fully grasp that these codes could save their lives someday, but their parents do. One 8-year-old girl used her family code 3 weeks after Olivia's workshop. She got separated from her parents at an amusement park, scared and overwhelmed by crowds. She texted her mom red balloons, and her mom immediately stopped what she was doing to find her. The mom told me later that without the code, she might have assumed her daughter was fine, might have taken longer to realize something was wrong. Another kid, a 10-year-old boy, used his code when his older brother's friends started making him uncomfortable, making inappropriate comments, trying to get him alone. The boy texted his dad music lessons, and his dad immediately came to pick him up, asked questions, found out what was happening, confronted the friend, and made sure he never came around their house again. These codes give kids agency, give them a way to communicate danger without putting themselves at more risk by asking directly. And it all started with 7-year-old Olivia's obsession with World War II codebreakers and secret spy games. Olivia wants to write a book someday about safety codes and abuse prevention. She's already started outlining chapters: recognition of red flags, creating escape plans, building support networks, teaching kids to trust their instincts. She's collecting stories from other survivors, kids who've used family codes to escape danger, parents who created systems with their kids that actually worked when needed. Her therapist thinks writing the book would be good for her, processing the trauma through creation, helping others while helping herself heal. I told Olivia I'd support whatever she wants to do. If she wants to share her story publicly, I'll be there. If she wants to keep it private and just write under a pseudonym, that's fine too. What matters is that she's building a life beyond what Brandon did to her, that she's not letting his violence define her future. She's not defined by being a victim. She's defined by being a survivor who's helping others survive too. And we still use the rainbow system, but now we've expanded it and made it more sophisticated. Red balloons still means danger. We've added new phrases for specific situations. Thinking about summer means I'm being followed. The garden needs watering means I'm in physical danger. Looking at old photos means I need you right now, but can't explain why. Olivia made me promise to teach the system to any future romantic partners she seriously dates, so they'd have a way to communicate if they ever felt unsafe. She wants it to be something multiple people in her life know, not just me. She taught it to her 2 closest friends as well. They practiced it until it became second nature. They've already used it twice in situations that weren't emergencies, but could have become dangerous. Once when a guy at a party wouldn't take no for an answer. Once when a friend's ex started showing stalker behavior. The code gave them a way to signal for help without escalating situations publicly. Olivia also started teaching younger kids about creating their own family codes as a safety tool. She volunteers at a youth center and runs workshops about personal safety, including communication strategies for when you can't speak freely. She emphasizes that these codes should be taught and practiced regularly so they become automatic in crisis situations. The kids love it because it feels like a game, but Olivia makes sure they understand it's a serious tool that could save their lives someday. Looking back now, I'm grateful for 7-year-old Olivia's obsession with secret codes. Grateful that we took the time to create that system, even though it seemed silly at the time. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.